I found out my brother's firm lost $5.5 million a few days after his wedding. Not months later, not years later, days. It was my older brother. He was the one getting married. The number that kept coming up was 5.5 million. And the part that didn't make sense was that the loss was anonymous. I remember wondering if I was misunderstanding something. I started doing the math in my head, and nothing lined up. I didn't know what it meant yet. I just knew I would have to explain how it started. I should probably back up a little. My brother and I were never close in the way people expect brothers to be. We grew up in the same house but lived very different versions of life. He was loud, confident, always sure of his next step. I was quieter, slower to decide, the one who double-checked things. That difference always bothered him more than it bothered me. By the time he was in his late 20s, he had built this image around himself. Big law firm, expensive suits. Stories that always ended with people being impressed. At family gatherings he was the example, the one my parents pointed to without meaning to. I worked too, just not in a way that looked impressive on the surface. I stayed in a smaller role, same company for years. Predictable hours, predictable pay. I liked knowing what my days would look like. He used to call it playing it safe. We didn't fight much, we didn't talk much either. When he got engaged, I was genuinely happy for him. His fiancée seemed kind, organized, very aware of how things looked from the outside. Their wedding was planned like a production. Guest list, seating charts, speeches timed down to the minute. The night of the rehearsal dinner, I could already feel that familiar tension. The polite smiles. The way conversations stopped when I walked up. I told myself it was in my head. The wedding itself was beautiful. Everything was expensive but tasteful. At least that's what people kept saying. I stayed mostly near the back, talked to relatives I hadn't seen in years. Then came the speeches. I wasn't expecting to be mentioned at all. And honestly, that would have been fine. But when my brother stood up holding his glass, he started talking about family, about hard work, about expectations. And then he looked straight at me. He laughed, just a little. He said something like, "Every family has one person who never quite figures it out. The one who plays it safe while others take risks. The disappointment everyone pretends not to notice." People laughed. Some people didn't. I felt my face get hot. I remember thinking maybe I misheard him. But then he added my name, casually. Like it was obvious who he meant. I didn't say anything. I nodded, even smiled. That's what I've always done. I told myself it wasn't the place, not the time, but something about it didn't sit right. After the wedding, I went home and went back to my normal routine, work, groceries, quiet evenings. I didn't talk to him. He didn't reach out either. 3 days later, I got a call from a former coworker, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. He asked me, carefully, if I had heard about my brother's firm. That's when I first heard the number, 5.5 million. I didn't ask questions right away, I just listened. And the more he talked, the more I realized this wasn't a rumor. Something had already started moving, and I hadn't decided yet what I was going to do about it. When I hung up the phone, I sat there longer than I meant to. I kept replaying the call in my head. Not the details, the tone. The hesitation before he said my brother's name. The way he asked if I had heard anything yet. I hadn't. I started looking things up slowly. Public filings, industry news. Nothing dramatic, just quiet confirmations. A transfer here. A missing line item there. The kind of thing most people would never notice. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. The money wasn't stolen. The way people imagine. No masked figures, no alarms. It was moved, redirected, signed off in pieces small enough to stay invisible for a while. Anonymous on paper, not anonymous in practice. What made my stomach tighten wasn't the loss itself. Firms lose money all the time. It was the timing. Everything pointed back to the weeks before the wedding, right when he was distracted, right when approvals were being rushed. I told myself it wasn't my business. I wasn't part of his firm. I wasn't part of his life, really. I tried to let it go. But then another call came. This time from someone inside the firm. Someone who knew I was family. He didn't accuse me of anything. He just asked questions that felt too careful. Did you ever sign anything for him? Did he ever ask you to hold funds temporarily? Did you ever act as an intermediary? The answer was no. Always no. Still, my name was now in a conversation I never asked to be part of. I started thinking back. Little moments I had brushed off. Him asking what my banking limits were. Whether I still had my old investment account. Casual questions. Almost jokes. At the time, I hadn't thought twice. Now I did. I realized something uncomfortable. He had always assumed I would stay quiet, that I wouldn't look too closely, that I wouldn't push back, that being the safe one meant being passive. That realization sat with me for a few days. During that time, my brother finally called. His tone was different, less confident. He didn't mention the wedding speech, he didn't apologize, he talked around the issue. Asked if anyone had contacted me. Asked what I knew. I told him the truth, not everything, just enough. There was a pause, longer than normal. Then he said something I still think about. He said family should protect family, even when things get complicated. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt anymore. I was tired. Tired of carrying expectations that were never mine. That night, I opened an old folder I hadn't touched in years. Documents, emails, things I had kept out of habit, not intention. At the time, they had seemed insignificant. Now they felt heavier. I didn't make a decision immediately. I just organized them, put dates in order, read things twice. And that was the moment I understood there was no going back to how things were. Even if I did nothing, I didn't sleep much that week. Not because I was panicking. It was quieter than that. My mind kept looping through the same question. What happens if I stay silent? I went to work like normal, answered emails, sat in meetings. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, I was carrying information that didn't belong to me but somehow had landed in my hands. Another call came in. This time it was from a compliance officer connected to an external review. He didn't know me personally. He knew my last name. He spoke carefully. Asked if I would be willing to clarify a few things. I asked him what kind of things. Dates, transfers, authorization chains. Nothing emotional, just facts. I told him I would think about it. When I hung up, I realized my brother hadn't called again. No follow-up, no checking in, just silence. That silence felt louder than his wedding speech. I kept thinking about the word he used. Disappointment. Not angry, not irresponsible. Disappointment. Like I had failed some unspoken test. And maybe that's why this hit differently. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't trying to fix him. I just didn't want to be dragged into something I didn't create. A few days later, my brother finally showed up at my apartment. No warning. No call ahead. He looked tired. His confidence was thinner now. Still there. Just strained. He didn't sit down at first. He told me people were asking questions. That things were being misunderstood. That firms like his deal with this kind of thing all the time. Then he said something that felt familiar. He said I shoal. Do you trust him? That he knew what he was doing. That this would all blow over. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse him. I just asked one question. I asked him if my name was anywhere in the paperwork. He hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any answer could have. He said it wasn't a big deal, that it was temporary, that he assumed I wouldn't mind. After all, I wasn't using those accounts anyway. That's when I stood up. I told him I wasn't comfortable being involved. I said it calmly, almost apologetically. He looked surprised, like that possibility hadn't crossed his mind. He reminded me we were family. I told him that was exactly why I needed distance. After he left, I sent one email. Short, direct. I agreed to answer factual questions if contacted officially. Nothing more. I didn't feel relief, I felt clarity. The firm's situation didn't resolve quickly. Reviews take time, consequences move slowly. I went back to my routine. My life didn't change much on the surface, but something fundamental had shifted. I stopped carrying his expectations. I stopped absorbing his confidence as truth. And for the first time, being the safe one didn't feel like a weakness. It felt like a boundary. The first official email arrived 2 weeks later. It wasn't dramatic. No accusations, just a request for clarification, dates, amounts. Confirmation that I hadn't authorized anything beyond what was already documented. I read it 3 times before replying. Not because I was scared, because I wanted to be precise. I answered exactly what they asked. Nothing extra, no opinions, no speculation. I attached the documents I had already organized. Sent it. Closed my laptop. Went for a walk. That was the moment things stopped feeling theoretical. After that, the silence around my brother changed. At first, there was nothing. No calls, no messages. Then the tone shifted. He started texting late at night. Short messages. Asking if I had heard anything new. Asking what I had said. I kept my replies neutral. I told him the truth. I told him I had answered. Factual questions. He didn't like that word. Factual. He wanted reassurance. Loyalty. Something less defined. Around that time, our parents called. Separately. Same questions. same careful phrasing. Had I talked to anyone? Was everything okay? They said his firm was under stress, that weddings are expensive, that pressure makes people act out of character. I didn't argue. I didn't agree either. I noticed something then. No one asked me how I was. They asked what I had done. That detail stayed with me. At work, I kept my head down. I didn't mention any of it, but I could feel myself pulling inward, measuring every interaction, making sure nothing from my personal life spilled into professional space. Another request came in. This one more formal. A scheduled call. Compliance present. Legal present. Still calm. Still procedural. They asked about a specific transfer, one that passed briefly through an account in my name. I recognized it immediately. It had been there less than 48 hours. Years ago. I hadn't questioned it at the time. He had said it was temporary, a routing issue. I told them that. I also told them I hadn't approved its purpose, I hadn't benefited from it, and I hadn't known where it was going. There was a pause on the line, not uncomfortable, just deliberate. They thanked me. After that call, my brother stopped asking questions. He started making statements instead. He said people were overreacting, that firms protect their own, that nothing would come back on family if everyone stayed aligned. Aligned was his word. I thought about that wedding speech again. About disappointment. About expectations. About how easily he had defined me in front of everyone. And I realized something quietly. He had always assumed alignment meant silence. That night I wrote down a boundary. Not to send. Just for myself. What I would answer. What I wouldn't. Where my responsibility ended, I didn't feel brave. I felt careful, and for the first time I trusted that instinct. The reviews started showing up in places I couldn't ignore. Industry updates. Quiet mentions in newsletters. Nothing naming him directly yet. Just phrases like internal controls and governance concerns. My brother noticed too. He started calling again, not to ask what I knew, to tell me what he needed. He needed consistency. He needed me to remember conversations a certain way. He needed me not to complicate things. I listened. I didn't promise anything. One evening he sent me a long message, longer than anything he had ever written to me before. He said he felt blindsided, that he had worked too hard to have everything questioned now. That people like me didn't understand how fragile success could be. People like me. That phrase landed heavier than the rest. I typed a response. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. In the end, I sent a single line. I told him I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was trying not to be involved in something that wasn't mine. He didn't reply. A week later, an external auditor reached out. Different firm, different tone. They already had the documents I sent earlier. They wanted context. Not explanations, just confirmation of patterns. They asked if my brother ever explained why my accounts were used. They asked if I had benefited financially. They asked if I had objected at the time. I answered honestly. I said I trusted him then. I said I didn't question things I didn't fully understand. I said I wouldn't make the same choice now. No one reacted to that. They just took notes. After that call, I felt something shift again. Not relief, distance. Like I had stepped back far enough to finally see the shape of things. At a family dinner shortly after, the mood was strained. Everyone was polite, overly polite. My brother barely looked at me. When he did, it was with something close to calculation. Our parents talked about weather, about work, about anything except what was hanging in the room. At one point, my mother asked if everything would be okay. I said I hoped so. That was the most honest answer I had. Later that night, my brother pulled me aside. He told me I didn't understand what was at stake. That reputations don't recover, that people remember who stood where. I told him I understood that better than he thought. He asked me directly if I would stand by him. I didn't answer right away. I said I would stand by the truth. Whatever that ended up being, he looked at me like I had chosen against him. Maybe I had just stopped choosing him automatically. That was the moment I accepted something I had been avoiding. Whatever came next, our relationship wouldn't survive it intact. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They came in pieces. A delayed meeting here. A postponed announcement there. The kind of things that signal trouble without saying it out loud. My brother's firm didn't collapse overnight. That's not how these things usually happen. Instead, accounts were frozen temporarily. Then access was restricted. Then certain partners stepped back. Quietly, people noticed. He stopped calling entirely. No updates, no pressure, just absence. That absence felt intentional, like he was drawing his own boundary now. I heard about the final figure from someone else. Still 5.5 million. Still unresolved. Still labeled as anonymous in the public summary. But internally it wasn't anonymous anymore. Patterns had names. Timelines had signatures. Mine wasn't one of them. I didn't celebrate that fact. I didn't feel vindicated. Mostly, I felt tired. At work, I asked for a few days off. Nothing dramatic. Just space. I needed to hear my own thoughts without his voice layered over them. Without the family narrative filling in gaps. During that time, I wrote things down again. Not evidence. Not notes for anyone else. Seek clarity for myself. What I knew, what I didn't. Where I had been careless, where I had been used. That part was hard to admit. I realized something uncomfortable about myself. I had confused trust with passivity. I had let things slide because it felt easier than asking questions. Because questioning him always felt like stepping out of line. That wasn't loyalty, that was avoidance. The firm eventually released a statement, carefully worded. No names, no numbers, just restructuring, leadership changes, a commitment to transparency going forward. My brother wasn't mentioned. But he wasn't where he used to be either. We didn't talk after that. Not formally, not informally. No apology from him. No explanation. I didn't expect one. At a family gathering months later, we were in the same room again. Briefly. We nodded. Nothing more. The distance between us felt permanent but calm. Like something that had settled instead of broken. Someone asked how he was doing. I said I didn't know. And for once, that didn't feel like failure. What surprised me most was what didn't change. My job stayed the same. My routine stayed the same. The life he once mocked didn't suddenly look small to me. It looked stable. I understood then that disappointment had always been his word, his measurement, his scale. I didn't need to keep carrying it. Some relationships end loudly. Ours ended quietly, and that quiet felt earned. It had been a few months since the firm announced its restructuring. Long enough that people stopped asking direct questions. Short enough that nothing felt settled. I noticed my brother's name came up less often now. When it did, it was usually followed by a pause, or a change of subject, that told me more than any headline ever could. I didn't hear from him directly. Not once. No anger. No explanation. Just distance. At first, I thought that distance would feel heavy, like something unfinished. But over time, it softened into something quieter. Space. One afternoon, I got a call from someone I didn't recognize. The number was unfamiliar. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. He introduced himself as a junior attorney from a firm I knew by reputation. He wasn't calling on behalf of my brother. He made that clear quickly. He said he had reviewed parts of the file during a handover. He just wanted to confirm one small thing. He asked if I had ever received any compensation, any benefit, any informal thank you tied to those transfers. I said no, without hesitation. He paused. Then he said that matched everything else they had, that was it. No follow-up, no warning. Just confirmation. When the call ended, I sat there for a moment, not relieved, not anxious, just aware that another door had quietly closed. I thought about how different this felt from the wedding, from that moment of public embarrassment, from being labeled without being asked. Back then, I had felt small, exposed, defined. Now no one was defining me at all. At a family dinner shortly after, someone mentioned my brother's wife, how she was adjusting, how stressful it must all be. Everyone nodded. I did too. No one asked about my side of things, and for the first time that didn't bother me. I realized I didn't need the story corrected. I didn't need anyone to admit they were wrong. I just needed my name to stop being part of something it never belonged to. That was already happening. A few weeks later, I ran into my brother unexpectedly. Grocery store. Middle of the afternoon, no warning, no buffer. He looked thinner. Not unhealthy. Just worn down around the edges. We stood there for a second too long, both unsure who should speak first. He nodded, I nodded back, he said my name. Nothing else. No tone, just recognition. I said his, and that was all. We didn't talk about the firm, or the wedding, or the word disappointment. There was nothing left to clarify, nothing left to defend. As I walked away, I felt sumped. Hing settle fully for the first time. Not closure, acceptance. Some relationships don't end with a conversation. They end with a shift. A quiet understanding of where the line now sits, and I knew exactly where mine was. After that encounter, I expected something to linger. Guilt, regret, maybe a delayed wave of sadness. None of that really showed up. What I felt instead was a kind of steadiness, Like my life had stopped tilting toward him without me noticing. I started paying attention to smaller things. How quiet my evenings felt. How little energy I spent replaying conversations. How my choices didn't need to be framed as reactions anymore. At work, I was given a new project. Nothing flashy. More responsibility. More trust. The kind of thing that builds slowly. My manager told me he appreciated how consistent I was. How predictable in a good way. I almost laughed when he said that. Predictable used to sound like an insult in my brother's mouth. Now it sounded like stability. Like something people relied on. Around that time, my parents asked if I would come by more often. They didn't say why. They didn't mention him. I agreed, not out of obligation, just because I wanted to. Those visits were quieter than they used to be. Less comparison, fewer updates about accomplishments, more space between sentences. It felt like everyone was adjusting to a new shape. One evening, my father asked me if I regretted anything. I asked him what he meant. He said the situation. Everything that had happened. He didn't push. He just asked. I told him the truth. I said I regretted not asking questions earlier. I regretted assuming silence was safer than clarity. But I didn't regret where I ended up. He nodded slowly, like he was filing that away. I noticed then that no one was trying to fix things anymore. No one was asking me to reach out. No one was suggesting apologies or reconciliation. The urgency had passed, and that felt like permission. A few weeks later, I received a final email. A formal closure notice. It thanked me for my cooperation. It stated that no further clarification was needed from me. That was all. I read it once, then deleted it, not dramatically. Just cleanly. I thought back to the wedding again, to the laughter, to the way the room had shifted when my name was said. I realized something important. That moment didn't define me. It revealed him, and even that wasn't my burden to carry. I understood now that being the quiet one didn't mean being invisible. It meant choosing when to speak, and choosing when not to. That choice had changed everything. Not loudly, not all at once, but enough. By the time everything was officially closed, I had stopped thinking about it every day. Not because it didn't matter anymore, but because it finally had a place. It wasn't floating around unresolved. It was just part of my history. I noticed that when people asked about my family, I answered differently now. Less defensively, less carefully. I didn't feel the need to explain gaps or smooth over silences. If my brother didn't come up, I didn't bring him up. If he did, I kept it simple. Life kept moving in small, ordinary ways. Work deadlines, weekend errands, conversations that didn't carry subtext. That ordinariness felt earned. Once, a colleague asked me if I ever wished I had taken more risks. Bigger leaps. The kind that come with stories people repeat at weddings. I thought about it for a moment before answering. I said I used to think that way. I used to believe risk was the same thing as courage. Now I wasn't so sure. There's courage in staying. There's courage in saying no. There's courage in not letting someone else's urgency become your emergency. I never spoke to my brother again after that grocery store moment. Not out of spite, not out of fear, it just never came up naturally. And I wasn't interested in forcing it. Sometimes I wondered if he still thought of me as the disappointment. Oh, or if that word had lost its meaning for him too. But I stopped trying to solve that question. What mattered more was how I saw myself. I saw someone who had been careful, sometimes too careful. Someone who trusted without checking. Someone who learned, late, that boundaries don't make you disloyal. They make you clear. I didn't win anything. I didn't lose everything either. What I gained was quieter than that. I gained ownership of my own name. I gained distance where distance was needed. I gained a life that didn't need to be impressive to be solid. And when I look back at that wedding now, I don't replay the speech anymore. I don't hear the laughter. I remember the moment afterward. When I sat alone. When something in me shifted. That was the beginning, not the end, and I'm okay with that.